Welcome back to the nationally syndicated Price of Business Show. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Recently, I had Batya Ungar-Sargon on the program talking about the media and particularly as it related to the story of the Democrats choosing to make the first primary for the presidential primary in South Carolina, which is significant, but somehow got largely ignored by the media. I mean, yep, it happened. Here it is. Batya Ungar-Sargon, in this interesting interview, she explains why the media reacted that way. The media really did not want them to move there. The media, therefore, largely ignored it, maybe even wishful thinking that they would not move it from Iowa, which was 90% white, to South Carolina, which is really a true demographic representation of the United States. So in this interview, Batya Ungar-Sargon, who is the deputy opinion editor of Newsweek and a regular guest on The Price of Business, goes into the significance of this story. Why, for example, was Joe Biden so passionate about it? What does it say about the future of the Democratic Party? What will it do in terms of making the party a more moderate, a more centrist party, and much, much more? It's a fascinating interview with insights that, frankly, we're not finding anywhere else. It's among the reasons why I love having Batya on the program. Check it out. So let's talk about this big brouhaha that the Democrats had. You know, for years they've been saying, yeah, it's as wrong in our first primary, which really, begins to set the stage and lets presidential candidates get delegates from the very beginning, that the first one is in a state that is 90% white, 90% white, roughly, and that being Iowa. And we need to start in a place that's more like America, more diverse. And so they went to South Carolina as now going to be the first place or the first primary for the Democrats in the presidential campaigns. And when I heard that, I honestly thought, I thought it was going to be a story that would blow up, but it didn't. It was almost like a collective yawn.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
What is up with that?
So here's my theory about that. So first of all, the first thing to point out is, Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg are the first two people who come to mind as dead in the water. People who would do really well in Iowa, really well in New Hampshire, really well in Vermont, and had zero traction with the Black community, zero traction. So you used to have a Super Tuesday, and that became, really clear. But that's going to be really clear from the first primary now, who the Black community feels they can put their faith in, and that is not going to be, Pete Buttigieg, and it's not going to be Senator Sanders. I don't know if Senator Sanders is going to run again, but he really was not able to translate his message into language that was compelling to Black Americans. So it's really going to change the sort of, the center of gravity of the party in a way that I think is phenomenal, because, at the end of the day, the Democratic Party has decided that its base is the college educated, when really its base has historically been, at least for the last 40 years, the Black community, and they've gotten very little out of that relationship. So I think it's a really, really cool and interesting move. The reason I think that you didn't hear more about it is because the Black community's inherent moderation, right? Its inherent moderateness is something that our media is very uncomfortable with. And I'll just give you some data points. So, for example, only 29% of Black Democrats, okay, not Black Americans, only 29% of Black Democrats call themselves liberal. Okay, 71% of Black Democrats call themselves either moderate or conservative. Now, this makes Democrats in the media elites and the political elites deeply uncomfortable, because they are not just liberal but progressive. They are extremely liberal. They are woke. They are very far left. And anything that exposes the gap between where the liberal Democratic elite is at politically and where the base of the party is at, which is Black Americans, is at, in terms of ideology, that makes them extremely uncomfortable, because, of course, they do all of their woke nonsense in the name of the Black community. So when it's exposed that Black Americans are not interested in this garbage, they're very threatened by that. And so I think there was sort of like an unwillingness to talk about the impact that this is going to have, that moving the first primary to South Carolina is going to have, because of course it's going to make the Democratic Party reflect liberal working class Americans, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans much more closely, because the first test is going to be, can you appeal to the Black community, which is not woke and not very liberal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and by the way, to prove, to endorse what you're saying or to support what you're saying, Bernie Sanders' team, he has not said anything either way to my knowledge, but his team were very critical of the move. People that worked on his previous campaigns did not like the idea. They came out and said that. And so, you're not going to hear Bernie say that, because it will be equated to racism, and maybe rightly so. But it is fascinating. And proof to the pudding about the way blacks are. I've always considered blacks, you use the word moderate, which is fine. I just think they're very pragmatic. I think it's what works for us, what works for me, and I kind of like that practicality. I see that in the black population. Do they vote liberal on a lot of things? Yes. A lot of that is based on just the dynamics and the history and that type of thing. But there's that attitude. And I think in 2008 in California, when the state of California was passing a bill for same-sex marriage, and Barack Obama was running for president that year, that 70% of blacks voted for Barack Obama and against same-sex marriage that year in California.
Yeah. It's a deeply religious community. It's a community that is Democratic. 90%. Between 85 and 90% vote for Democrats, but at the same time, the community is deeply ambivalent about abortion. 35-40% of Black Americans are pro-life. There's a lot of ambivalence about the topic. They want it to be legal, but they don't support it morally, which is something that, again, the progressive left, which is, shout your abortion, is like completely alienated from where this community is actually at. Some of the parts of the community need social services, but the number one issue they're looking for are good jobs. They just don't have the same access. So, it's a complex community that's deeply, deeply enmeshed in who Americans are, very reflective of, what the average American is like. And it is really, to me, it is really a shame that Republicans have failed to make more inroads in this community, purely for lack of trying, as far as I can tell. Education, for example, extremely important to Black parents. But you don't see Republicans going into the community and saying, look, we're going to give your kids school choice. We're going to give you an opportunity to get this kid out of this neighborhood, right? You just don't see that. You don't see them making the real effort. They've sort of given up trying, and I really hope that we're going to see more of that, because Black Americans deserve a choice like everybody else.
For the rest of the interview, click the links below.